It is always so incredibly sad to see an industry that's so beloved be torn to shreds from the inside out, because we as fans obviously can't do much about that. We can't control when good, honest, hardworking people inside of a company get fired. The only things that we can really control are what products we want to support, which artists and writers we want to support, and let our wallets speak for themselves a lot of the time. But there is a lot of very believable rumors circulating around about DC and the comics industry in general right now, and they are coming from none other than Ethan Van Sciver. And I get that a lot of you may not like EVS, but he has been correct about a ton of his speculation surrounding the comics industry, which is really why I wanted to read through this article and read through his claims. And we're also going to talk about some more breaking news, how Geoff Johns is actually ditching DC and moving to Image Comics, which is something I didn't know about until just a little while ago before I got ready to make this video, and I'm pretty shocked at this news. So we're going to start off with a Cosmic Book News article. DC Comics closing, Jim Lee leaving, says Ethan Van Sciver. So in the wake of the layoffs and recent changes at DC Comics, it's again claimed by EVS the publishing division will close its doors, and also that Jim Lee will be leaving the company. Van Sciver, a 27-year veteran of the comic book industry known for working on DC's Green Lantern, first predicted AT&T would be closing DC Comics back in February, with a number of his other predictions related to DC and the comic book business also having come true in recent months. Like I said, a lot of the claims that he makes are true, they end up being true, so that's why I wanted to give these rumors and these speculations a little bit more weight, just because he's been correct a lot of the time, and obviously he's not correct 100% of the time, but it's still really interesting to hear these claims from him. So DC Comics closing claims Ethan Van Sciver. So in case you haven't figured it out yet, DC Comics is closing down their publishing division. Now, don't worry everyone, that doesn't mean there isn't going to be Batman, Superman, maybe Wonder Woman and stuff, said Van Sciver in his latest video posted to his YouTube channel. What I think is happening going forward is DC Comics is going to pare down in the immediate future to a handful of comic books, maybe 12 comic books per month, maybe fewer than that, and these comics are going to be things like the Justice League, Superman, and Batman, and that's basically it. There might be backup stories in these books, maybe there will be a Justice League supersized book, and you will be able to get a Green Lantern short story or a Flash or a Hawkman story. And it says, but they are not taking any more chances. Publishing is being pared down, and only the best creative teams are going to be allowed to work on them. Now, coming from the perspective of someone who worked at a comic book store for several years, if DC cuts publishing down to a tiny amount, the industry just can't survive on Marvel by itself without both DC and Marvel publishing. It's unfortunate, but the idea of a comic book store can't exist. There's just not enough product. And Disney probably doesn't care about that either. They don't care about comic book shops. These companies want to not completely get rid of publishing, but they don't want to be part of the periodical model that's existed for comics since the beginning, and they want to publish books like manga. It looks to me like the amount of books that they'll be publishing will seriously decline, like the article kind of says, and yeah, we've been talking about them restructuring, but how much they publish is probably going to be greatly affected by all this, and it's very unfortunate if you're a fan of the comic book industry. And going to the second part of the article, it says Jim Lee is not, in fact, in charge of DC Comics. EVS goes over some of the recent changes among the executives at DC and points out that the newly appointed sole EIC, Mary Javins, will report directly to the new DC Comics general manager, an outside hire, instead of DC Comics co-publisher and chief creative officer Jim Lee. It says a lot of AT&T's actions were to bring in people from outside corporations to come in and basically to close down DC Comics. Shrink it down, and then get it to a point where it's manageable, and then slowly, yeah, they're going to divest themselves of DC. And basically, what I think they are going to do, these guys are going to license the characters out to other publishers. It says DC also recently fired Dan Didio, where Van Sciver says Jim Lee didn't want to take on all of his responsibilities. It says Jim Lee was co-president with him, but it was completely an honorary title. Jim Lee didn't belong there, and he didn't do very much there, he explained. It was just that he had become so powerful and was such a valuable piece of horse flesh, and obviously a guy that can draw that well, you want to keep him on board. Jim Lee was uncomfortable in his position when Dan was fired, and a lot of people were thinking that this meant he was going to be performing the role that Dan had performed all of these years, and Jim Lee doesn't want to do that, and he's not capable of doing that. That's not what he wants to do. That's not his role. So these are some very interesting rumors, definitely, and I also wanted to go over to this because now we've heard the announcement that Geoff Johns is actually ditching DC for Image, and I mean, I seriously am surprised by this. I mean, another one bites the dust. So this is a Hollywood Reporter article, and it says Geoff Johns moves to Image Comics for Geiger. The former DC chief creative officer is going independent for his latest collaboration with Doomsday Clock artist Gary Frank. So the former chief creative officer of DC, Geoff Johns, will be publishing his first comic book outside of the company in more than a decade, with the announcement of Geiger, a new creator-owned title for Image Comics, launching in 2021. I'm shocked that he ditched DC after all of these years to go to Image. It says this series is set years after a nuclear war almost destroyed the Earth, and named after the one man considered the most dangerous in the radioactive wasteland left inhabitable, and John created it with artist Gary Frank, his partner on Doomsday Clock, and the Batman Earth 1 series of graphic novels. This is a pretty generic plot, it sounds like. We don't know the details of it yet, so obviously when it gets closer to releasing we'll have more information, but it sounds like an okay plot. We obviously need to see what the twists and turns are gonna be, but I do think that, you know, with his name attached, both of these names attached actually, it could do pretty damn good. It says, Gary and I have been secretly working away on this project since we finished up Doomsday Clock earlier this year, and we couldn't be more excited to be doing our first creator-owned book for Image, he told Bleeding Cool, which broke the news of the title. Geiger marks John's first new project announced since his departure as the CCO and president of DC in 2018, although both his Batman 3 Jokers comic book series and the first season of his Stargirl TV series, both DC projects, have recently completed. I'm not surprised that he left, I'm just more surprised that he went to Image at this point, but the article finishes with, it's also the first project announced since Justice League star Ray Fisher claimed the former exec enabled alleged bad behavior by filmmaker Joss Whedon on the set of reshoots for that movie. Now, unfortunately, Geoff Johns is actually being also blamed for Ben Affleck quitting as Batman because apparently he was super rude to Affleck, and he gave him a hell of a time when they worked together. So who really knows what's happening behind the scenes, but we do have multiple actors, you know, affiliated with that movie saying that he was a really big problem. But tons of people are being let go from DC, which some of them have been woke and some of them have not been, and it seems like they're just really scaling back with what's going on in publishing. All I know is that the comics industry has changed, unfortunately, for the worst. Writers are pushing politics into the industry, artists are abandoning large companies, and publishing comics is unfortunately a loss, it sounds like. And With companies not publishing books anymore, if DC really scales back, it's going to really hurt comic book stores, and it's sad because comics are so fun and interesting when the stories are good, but unfortunately the future isn't looking very bright. But that's all that I really had to discuss in this video. Some rumors, some brand new news, wow, that's a tongue twister, some brand new news about Geoff Johns moving to Image Comics, and yeah, if you enjoyed this video, please make sure to give it a like and share it, and of course if you didn't, make sure to give it a dislike. I appreciate your support either way, but I will talk to you all again in the next video really soon.